Game protagonists aren't necessarily goody two-shoes, but they aren't baddie, lots of boots wearing multiple boot bad. Let's stop with that. Morality systems in games that give you options have made it possible to act just a little bit meaner, but you still often end up as the hero. I mean, you're still trying to save the world, right? Why can't you destroy it? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx we ask the question, why don't more games let you play as a villain? So, branching morality systems, a game that gives you agency as to how you complete the task at hand, allows you to be quote-unquote evil. Fable 2, a game that I think did this very well, still ended up putting you on the path of the hero. You could be a very corrupt and awful hero, but you were still a hero. Ultimately, your goal was to save everything. Renegade Shepherd is still Shepherd, still attempting to defend and attain a greater good. And although there are games that kind of let you play bad characters, I'm not going to say that Saints Row ever puts you in the role of a quote-unquote good guy, although I guess the jury's kind of out on Agents of Mayhem as far as that goes. Although that certainly could have been a better game, but that's besides the point. Let's talk a little bit about how quote-unquote evil is portrayed in a game. Now you, as a person outside of the video games, all of them, don't even think about video games for a minute or two. You probably don't want the world to be destroyed. I mean, in order to play the video games, there has to be a world that you are yourself sitting on and playing the video games. So for that reason, you have motivation to keep the world as it is, safe and sound, at least as much as it is now, which isn't a lot, but we as gamers in our first world countries playing our games are relatively safe. In real life, it's nearly impossible to sympathize with an actual real life villain. Not that there really are real life villains. Most people have much more complex motives than I am evil and I will destroy everything. People aren't like that. People in the world do things for a lot of different reasons. What we might consider evil could be done for money. See the whole loot box controversy. See it hard. The people on the other end of that controversy are really kind of just looking at it as business as usual. They have obligations to deliver to their shareholders and earn a salary, maybe have families that they provide for. It's really just people doing what their position dictates they're supposed to do. But it is still manipulative and awful. How do you reconcile that? Well, they're not actual villains, because there aren't actual villains. The way evil works is mostly just ignoring the actual effects of your actions as they relate to other people. Whereas in a video game, you have to have something that you just easily want to stop. And a cackling bad guy, though automatically unrealistic, is certainly a lot more fun. But for the sake of argument, let's talk about what a game would be like if you were a villain. As you occupied the villain, you would learn about the villain. You would learn about their motivations. You would learn their backstory. You would begin to see things from their perspective, and in a lot of cases, that may end up changing your mind about whether or not they're a villain. At least in the context of the game, not necessarily in real life. Ultimately, when humanity tells stories, the perspective of the main character is often the perspective that has to eventually become sympathetic. If you didn't have motivation to do evil stuff, if it was just cackling villain simulator, sure, it would be fun. Yes, it absolutely would be enjoyable to cause a bunch of chaos, but it would be more in the Grand Theft Auto, I'm not going to play the story, I'm just going to fuck some shit up way. To go through a story where the character is developed in no way, where you learn nothing about their motivations or why they're doing what they're doing, isn't an interesting story. And therefore, having a two-dimensional villain as a protagonist just would not work from a narrative perspective. But let's also talk about it from a technical perspective. Let's say in a branching morality-oriented game like Mass Effect, the choices you made actually impacted the eventual goal. This essentially makes the game into multiple games. If Shepard's motive eventually became destroying the galaxy, then everything about the game has to change. Dialogue has to change, so you have to pay voice actors to do different dialogue, which has to be written, which means essentially doubling the labor of the writers. A lot of assets could be reused, sure, but the events would have to change, so the animations couldn't remain the same. You'd likely end up with a lot of necessary destruction animation, which is again going to be a lot more hours as far as labor is concerned. This makes the case that in order to play as a villain, it would have to be a linear story, and because it would have to be a linear story, it would have to bank on character development, and character development would eventually make you sympathetic to the character, and to understand their motive is to take them out of villain status, thusly putting them in anti-hero territory, which is basically our default anyway in video games. We have so many anti-heroes that we occupy over the course of a year in gaming, and yet none of them end up actually doing any true evil. Is it because we learn their perspective, or is it because we need them to be redeemable? I'd say that in a lot of cases it could be either or both. Obviously, game developers have different motives, but thinking about the ideas of morality and how they influence a narrative, and about how much more labor it would take to actually allow the narrative to diverge in a game that allows you to choose what morality you align with, I think makes a compelling case for why the worst we get is an anti-hero. Now, it would be cool if we spent more time developing villains in games overall, so that we didn't have as many two-dimensional villains. If we understood the villain's perspective, sure, it might make it a little bit harder to hate them, but it also makes for a better story. If we did more of that, then we maybe wouldn't have to worry about playing as a villain. But that's a lot of the argument for the case of a rich narrative, and honestly, we could go on about that forever. Would you like to play as a villain in a game? Even a 2D villain? In a game that isn't just a villain simulator, like what you do in Grand Theft Auto when you just get bored of the story and want to cause chaos? Leave us a comment, tell us what you think, and if you enjoyed this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed now, would be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.